Welcome to This Week, 60 minutes of analytical review of the big stories, topical issues and all the controversies around the world. I'm Somna Sambo. Our top stories. Tackling the problem of poor infrastructure in Nigeria. A new company is set up with 1 trillion naira to start with. Nigerian police arrest protesters at the site of Lekki shooting after the federal government had warned demonstrators against occupying the Lekki toll gate. And Lagos, in mourning, former Governor Lateef Jakande dies at the age of 91. He has been buried in his home state. Plus, U.S. former President Donald Trump's impeachment trial continues as senators agree to hold votes on witnesses. New efforts to boost infrastructure in Nigeria. President Muhammadu Buhari has approved the establishment of a public-private partnership-styled infrastructure company named Infraco. It will have an initial seed capital of 1 trillion naira. Infraco will finance public asset development and reconstruction and invest in cutting-edge infrastructure projects for roads, rail, power, and other key sectors. The funds will be provided by the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, and the Africa Finance Corporation. There are plans for the project to grow to 15 trillion naira. The board of Infraco will be chaired by the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria and include the heads of the other two agencies. There will also be federal and state government representation alongside 3 independent directors from the private sector. Let's take a listen.
We've had extensive consultations with the Office of the Vice President, the Governors Forum, the CBN, NSIA, and ourselves, together with representatives from the presidency, where we've worked over the last, I would say, 4 months through several steering committee meetings to come up with this structure. The idea is that this will be an independently managed entity where we plan to have an independent fund manager. We plan to have an experienced board that will command the respect of Nigerian and international capital markets for access to the funding that we need to execute all the infrastructure projects that we have in the country. We've always known that we cannot have and we do not have all the money for our projects. So the idea was always to create a framework that allows us to attract other capital to work with us in the country.
All right, for more on this, let's turn to Arise business analyst Bode Shosami. Good to have you, Bode. Let's have your views on these comments made by the Africa Finance Corporation chief executive and what this actually means and what you can tell us more about this new infrastructure company.
Well, there are several considerations, and like Mr. Zubair just said, we're talking about moving infrastructure needle from where we are to well-maintained and integrated road transport systems, which allow for transitions to other forms of transport, such as rail and waterways. And then, of course, the power infrastructure is also an area of need. We need to facilitate capacity generation and transmission to match population needs, have an extensive rail network that links major cities across all the 6 geopolitical zones, and access to decent, affordable housing, airports with adequate capacity levels to serve as the gateway for the region. And we're also talking about a pervasive broadband in rural and urban areas, which also will facilitate adoption of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things in industry, and so on. So this is a marathon, no doubt. And just like we heard, this is another start. It may look small, but the more important thing is to have the vehicle in place and to have the systems and the governance make sure it is right from the inception, so that this can be scaled up appropriately. There are many other important considerations. The central bank organized processes that enabled public and private sector to collaborate on the creation of this new vehicle. So a lot of thinking has gone into it. But I will just mention a few things that are very important. One, dreaming is good, but you need to get the prioritization right. So you have actionable projects with major impact on job and economic growth. So you're focusing on bankable things with the best multiplier effect on people, on development, and so on. And you want something that you can begin to see in maybe 90 to 180 days and deliver quick wins that have impact in the 3 to 5 year time frame. We know government definitely is short on funds, and this is just to help shore up all the various initiatives. And for example, roads just can't be just roads. They must connect to the farmers' channel so that you are enabling agro-allied the industry. You also want to connect to the miners' routes and access to markets, including exports. Be sure that you get good connection for industrial participants so that they can move their goods to ports and so on. And even for roads, you want to include fiber ducts and other provisions for wired broadband connectivity. So it's not so easy to begin to say this is going to move very quickly. All I can say is it's a fantastic start. We need this. It's way overdue. And when you consider that we could be having rural areas that are well connected with digital villages, this is a dream. But you really need to dream big in areas of infrastructure, particularly when you consider the gap that we have in a country like Nigeria.
Right, but considering the amount that has been set aside, 1 trillion naira, if you're talking about the local economy here, it sounds like huge money. But when you put it in dollar terms, it looks like it's not so huge compared to the magnitude of projects that this Infraco intends to execute. In all, how do you think Infraco can attract more finances, not just within Africa, but globally, and how will this impact on Nigeria's economy?
Well, just like we heard, as Barry said, it's a small start. I see clearly that the 1 trillion is small, given the scale and the type of projects that you want to eventually get into. But the more important thing is if you have the right vehicle, clearly in this era of low-cost capital, and in which we are seeing a lot of stimulus all over the world, my sense is that the problem is not going to be the money. The problem is going to be whether you have the appropriate governance, the right structures, and you have to think through why this is absolutely critical. We need to grow our economy and by at least 10% per annum over the next 2 decades to achieve the growth that we need, particularly to achieve the reduced unemployment, reduce poverty, and to really begin to see tangible progress. But if you look at where we are now, even before the pandemic, we're talking about 2 to 3% GDP growth. During the pandemic, of course, we went into contraction, and now we're talking about just climbing back to 2-3%. This infrastructure is one of the major drivers that analysts understand can be used to catalyze economic growth. They've done it in China, they've done it in India. In Nigeria, we have about a $100 billion gap that we need to address over maybe 2-3 years. And of course, you know that the fiscal and monetary policy is already stretched by COVID. So we just have to get infrastructure spending increasing by 15 to 18% per year to get to where we are. And we have to start somewhere. That's just where I will put it. Although I will agree, the focus now is on getting the quality of the vehicle right to attract the right type of partners who, of course, are looking for opportunities where there is yield, where there is growth. And Nigeria is certainly a magnet, or can be a magnet for this type of development financing.
I want to ask why there has not been anything like this before, because it's been muted over time that there's going to be a giant infrastructure company like this. But over the years, we've seen several governments parry this issue, or like in 2017, we had the NSIA bring in the infra credit. Is there any difference between the infra credit and this Infraco? And why is it coming now? Is it not late, like some people would say?
Well, Sumner, I agree, financing public asset development, rehabilitation, construction, and investing in all these projects is not something we haven't heard before. But let me just say that execution is not as easy as just talking about it. You need vision to push a modern, multimodal transportation system. We know we don't have proper utilization of our inland waterways. We need policies that can push this. And even for infrastructure projects, procurement processes have to be addressed, supply chain logistics issues such as getting materials through ports efficiently, dealing with too many ministries, processes have to be improved, weak contract management. So it's not just the money. Let me just put it as simply as that. But what this effort will also address, as I understand it, given the caliber of the people on the board and the leadership of the process, which of course is being led by the vice president, there would be also policy enablers to ensure that all the blockers are properly identified, and there will be the effort to, of course, address them. Governance is very important. You want to be sure that this money is well spent, is targeted. Ethics has to be at the very highest levels, and the historical blockers like corruption, obviously, one hopes will not come up again. But in the past, there have been issues like macroeconomic instability, political risk, which I suspect are we are in a better position. If you look at the scenario now, far better economic stability. And if you look at the indices, political risk, yes, it's still there, but we're a bit more institutional in our politics. So my sense is perhaps this is the time, given that this has started. This is not just the end of this type of infrastructure push, but it's very important for Nigerians to understand that this work just has to be done. We have to build our infrastructure to world-class levels. It's not going to build itself, and we need many of these types of projects, but it's a marathon, not a 100 meters dash by any stretch. But let's see how it kicks off.
Round off in about 60 seconds. Can you tell me if this is the time for this kind of initiative, considering the global pandemic, and then how markets are looking like globally? I mean, where would these monies be coming from?
Well, all over the world, the pandemic has drained public purses, used up monetary and fiscal space, and richer nations have massively borrowed. They may increase taxes. In the US, are talking about 20% of their GDP, about $4 trillion pushed. In Europe, we're talking about next generation EU. In Africa, we have a disadvantage in the sense that our fiscal space is tighter, revenue base of government is leaner. That means that projects like this are even more necessary so that we can get more of a private capital to come in to meet the gaps. And in many other areas, look at remote education, telehealth, remote working, which we're talking about. If you don't have broadband infrastructure, all these things cannot happen. So I think the imperative is even more critical as a result of COVID.
News business analyst Bode Oshosami speaking with us live from London on the Infraco company being put in place by the Nigerian government. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue with the show. Stay with us. Welcome back to This Week. I'm Somna Sambo. And in Nigeria's city of Lagos, several protesters were arrested after they tried to hold a peaceful rally against the reopening of the Lekki toll gate, where security forces shot at protesters in October. Police bundled over a dozen protesters into a black truck, and some other people drove past shouting "End SARS," referring to Nigeria's police unit accused of committing the deadly abuses. The federal government had warned against holding new protests at Lekki, saying the rallies could descend into violence in the name of justice. But the protesters have been defiant. Let's take a listen.
Some NSAS proponents have given notice of their plan to return to Lagos Lekki toll gate. To be specific, they want to return there on Saturday, February 13th this year. The occupied Lekki toll gate flyers have been circulating online, with the proponents threatening that Lagos will burn again. Let me be clear. While peaceful protests are the constitutional rights of Nigerians, violent protests are not. At this time, the chances that any peaceful protest will be hijacked are very high. Based on the intelligence and disposal of the federal government, some Nigerian activists have linked up with others outside Nigeria, including subversive elements with a view to destabilizing the country. We cannot, we must not, and will not allow this to happen.
Minister of Information there, Lai Mohammed. For more on this, I'm now being joined by Professor Abiodun Adeni, a Rise News analyst, and also by OK Apia, publisher of Other Paper Nigeria. Good to have you, gentlemen. Let's start with you, Prof. This issue of the reopening of the Lekki Toll Plaza. I mean, the Judicial Panel of Inquiry had said that after looking at all that had happened and the forensic examination of facts here and there, it feels that there's no reason why it should remain closed, and it gave a judgment that it should be reopened because it's a private company and it's, LCC is actually losing some money because about 30 billion had been borrowed and all of that. What's your view on the reopening and then the resumption of protests there today?
Well, it's just unfortunate, Somna, that we're coming back to this pass again after all that we should have learned from the NSAS protest. You know, we've made the point severally that protest is integral to democracy. It's a way for people to ventilate, you know, but ventilation should not necessarily be, lead to crisis, you know, or destruction anyway. It was unfortunate that the one for last year dovetailed into crisis, and we understood how it came about because hoodlums reportedly hijacked it. So learning from there, we would have expected that maybe the security agencies will have learned some lessons by creating a cordon, you know, for those who are concerned, who are agitated by any matter for that matter, to constrain themselves, to restrain themselves, and not obstruct the smooth flow of traffic in that area. You know, but arresting people now, some of them innocent, like we have seen, like we have had. We do not know how this will result. It will probably most definitely aggravate the situation. They create further tension, which we do not need at this time. We understand the economic reasons advanced by Lagos State government, that place is central in terms of for revenue generation. But revenue generation should exist side by side, you know, with the freedom of the people, freedom to associate, freedom to ventilate, and freedom, to express themselves in a situation where they feel, agitated by circumstances, around our system. Do not forget that protests, agitation, it's part of, it's an element, it's a mechanism for growth and development to thrive. Apart from because an advocacy is also advocacy method. Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now let's talk about this, the constitutionality of the protesters, and then what the federal government is saying. Like you heard Lai Mohammed saying there, okay, he was saying that they should not go there. And if they go there, there will be military might being shown. And we've seen that lots of policemen arresting the protesters here and there. I mean, why is the government clamping down on their right to protest?
Well, the government is doing what it thinks it's in its best interest, you know. But let me say that it appears that the government is not getting the right respect to confidence building. If you look at the entire episode of the NSAS protests, how it was hijacked by hoodlums, in quotes. You know, how the government initially caved in, okay, we'll meet all your demands, go back home, and you know, youth stayed back on the streets and all of that. You see, there was some form of rapprochement initially. So when the protests were hijacked, from some of the pictures and videos that were circulated, some of the hijack were perpetrated by so-called men in high places or by agents of men in high places. You saw some of the videos. You know, a government would have taken a bit of some time to investigate those videos, to investigate those incidences.
And which is
because
why we have the judicial
we knew that the protests
panel
had
of inquiry.
Exactly, the protests had been peaceful, it was going smoothly. In fact, it's a thing of pride for many Nigerians that the youth could actually conduct themselves in such peaceful, orderly manner and with all sense of decorum. But we saw how the protests got hijacked. Why didn't the government do something to find out who were those that hijacked the protests? Some of those pictures are circulating online.
That's why we have the judicial panel being set up by the Lagos State government and the federal government. And some people have said that these Lekki protesters shouldn't have come out to protest again, considering the fact that Lagos has not healed due to all the things that were burnt and all of that. That they should also think from the perspective of the government that no government will allow the society to just be disrupted because of certain issues.
They should also look at the perspectives of those who were hurt, those who were killed, those who were molested, those who were maimed by the protests. And the Lekki toll gate is iconic, right, of the entire episode. So it touches on the emotional, it touches on the psyche. You have not addressed the issues. Like you said, the panel is still sitting.
You think they've not got justice enough?
No,
that's why they're still coming out?
What would have expected, they should have been less hurry in opening up the toll gate, for instance.
But the panel has said it's an ongoing business concern, and there are loans that have been taken. If that's the case, they've done forensic analysis and haven't seen anything, you know, against the continued closure of the toll gate. So what would you say about that? And juxtapose it with the rights of the protesters to actually still continue to demand that until the panel ends its session, there's no reason why that toll plaza should be reopened. Well, because it's a dicey situation.
But I think we should understand that the panel is ordinarily a transitory justice system. It's not a final arbiter. They are only supposed to make recommendations to the chief executive, the state governor, who will now decide whether or not to accede to their recommendations. But in the circumstance, you know, a decision was supposedly taken by the panel, and we saw the government responding to it without any formal announcement or formal explanation, you know, or formal justification beside what we've had the Lagos Information Commission are saying. You know, but there was little or less communication in terms of explaining to the populace, you know, those who are still aggrieved, those who were reportedly killed, those who were reportedly maimed, and those who still have bullets in their bodies, you know, like we have had, you know. So anger was still in the land, and in the midst of this anger, you now came up and said you want to open the place, you know. We understand your position that because economic is also very important, revenue generation is very critical to infrastructural development and to peace and
all right, just before we leave this
you know, but all these have to be looked at.
I just want you to look at what some people have said, that this morning they actually saw the LCC construction company, one of their vehicles being used to convey some of the arrested persons. What do you think it would do to the brand of that Lekki construction company?
Well, very unfortunate. If that report is true, it's also very, very unfortunate and absolutely unacceptable. And it does not also help the image of the company itself. And that's why we're saying that, you know, while we are focused on resource generation, on business, we should also be mindful of our responsibility as corporate entities.
All right, we just have to go on a short break right now. When we resume, we'll continue with a whole lot of issues that we have here. Stay with us. Welcome back to This Week, where we review big stories and bring to you up-to-date analysis on relevant issues around the world. I'm Somna Sambu. The first civilian governor of Lagos State, Lateef Jakande, is dead. Mr. Jakande was popularly called Baba Kekere and a disciple of the former premier of the Old Southwest region, late Obafemi Awolowo. Nigerians are mourning the foremost journalist and Second Republic governor of Lagos State. Jakande, who is remembered for its free education program and massive infrastructure development in the country's former capital. He has been buried in his home state.
Man that served his people when they had the opportunity, that cared for people, was a fantastic journalist. I was talking to somebody that said he was the first graduate to be employed in Tribune in 1965. He was talking about Baba Jakande as the MD there. So he has done a lot of first. But I remember him more because when I finished in 1986 in UI, he came to my graduation ceremony and I was just perplexed.
How to spend frugally the little that you have to reach as many as you can get. That's what he did in respect of low-cost housing and schools and so on. Those schools were not the best in terms of physical facilities, but at least it served a purpose, reached out to so many, the Awori kids who might never have received education under the vision. The only thing was frustrated from achieving was the tram road, the monorail that he wanted to introduce to Lagos, which would have eased the heavy congestion we're having.
It's a life well spent and lived his life to the very last for the people. Even though we were in the private school when before he became the governor of Lagos State. But as governor, when he created the public school, we were the first set of people. All myself and my siblings were moved to the public schools.
I still have with me in the studio Professor Abiodun Adeni, a journalist and a Arise News analyst, and also by OK Epia, the publisher of Other Paper Nigeria, who's also a journalist. Gentlemen, the journalism community is mourning the passage of Lateef Jakande. He had a lot of firsts in several areas, but I don't know the fond memories you have of him. Let's start with you.
Well, I don't know. A lot has been said. You know, he was a great man, no doubt. He was outstanding as a journalist, you know, and of course outstanding as a politician. Even more as a politician, 40 years or nearly 40 years after he left office as governor of Lagos State, his record has not been surpassed, despite the fact that he ruled for only about a little over 4 years, you know. That's why sometimes I'm not too encouraged about some of these eulogies. We hear eulogies about some of our legends when they pass on, you know, but we fail often to learn from their legacies. Jakande lived for the people, you know. He was pattern, he was pious, you know, he was selfless, he was never self-aggrandizing like some of the leaders that came after him, not just in Lagos State, but across the entire spectrum of Nigerian politics, which is a shame, really. You know, the last of the titans are going, you know, this golden generation are passing away, and we're not seeing succeeding generations, you know, taking after them, which is a tragedy of our situation. Jakande, you know, again reminds me of what William Shakespeare once said, that is a man that has all the elements mixed in him. And of course, we can say to the world, this was a man.
All right, okay, let's talk about you know, his formation of the Newspaper Proprietors Association of Nigeria, alongside with some, you know, other elites, you know, ensuring that this remains the backbone of newspaper, you know, publishing in the country. Although he started by publishing his own paper, later on it's failed, and the NPAN, in one of his tributes, actually said that they had to loan him to politics later on. What are the fond memories you have about his contribution within the publishing sector?
Well, I mean, I look forward to when the NPAN will also quickly do what it did to
Ismaila Funtua.
Exactly, by naming, you know, immortalizing him something, because his contributions have been well lavishly and you know, noted, and we cannot overstate it. You know, here was a man whose contribution to journalism was not only outstanding, but, you know, extremely remarkable. And then, like, you know, it was said he was loaned to politics, but even more outstanding performance recorded in politics. And I think that is also instructive for the political class of today. Because away from the eulogies and from all of the niceties that are being said about him, what are they doing to ensure that his legacy lives on? What are they doing to replicate some of the things that he did? It is very instructive, specifically, for instance, that his death is coming at a time where you have some, what some people have referred to as land grab in Lagos, where people, families are being displaced, their homes are being pulled down and taken away forcefully, sometimes without notice or allegedly without notice. It doesn't quite speak well of the political class of today. And so, away from those eulogies and niceties, what is it that they can take away from their life?
Now, let's talk about
housing scheme and all of those legacies.
That's the housing scheme I wanted to talk about. He had this policy of free education and then social housing, which were all embraced within the manifesto of the Unity Party of Nigeria, which was a ruling party in that part of the country then. Why is it difficult for a lot of our politicians, when they get into office, to implement such kind of programs within a short period of time and achieve results like Jakande did in less than 5 years?
I think we have lost values. Our values have been eroded over the years, and this is not because of lack of the use of the right words in the manifesto. We are aware of the recent experiences of a party's manifesto when they got into power, and then we had rejections, and people distance themselves from, we didn't say this, we didn't say we'll do this. So it basically falls back to that bedrock of an erosion of public values, which is across all spectrum of our lives in this country, not just politics. But as leaders who are in politics, who are in political office, they have a responsibility to get us back, to begin to show some exemplary living and performance in office, so that the rest of citizens can also begin to pick this up and see, look, this is the way we should be going. We should try to find our way back to where we were, and begin to move forward.
Improve on those values.
Exactly.
Very interesting indeed. And it reminds me of, just like you mentioned earlier, this cadre of politicians are beginning to pass. Balaribe Musa, when we were talking about him too, it was almost a similar thing. You could actually point to things that these people had done. But now you see some governors actually doing 8 years and they are not even remembered for certain things.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about that tram that he wanted to bring, the railway he wanted to introduce, inner city railway within Lagos, which was now truncated by the then Muhammadu Buhari, who was the Major General and President, head of state of the country then. What do you think would have happened by now if that project had not been truncated?
Well, I think it came about this project sometimes in the 80s, and it was about 3 years after that France also came up with their own, and of course the level at which France is now. If you just look at that, you imagine where Lagos State will be and where probably the rest of this country will be now in terms of road transportation that we are still grappling with. The reason why we are still concerned about infrastructure capital, where we have agencies that are dedicated, committed to the development of infrastructure in terms of public-private partnership. So you can see a duplication. We are worried about these things now because we ignored, or we undermine leaders who saw tomorrow and helped us to worry about them. Those days, we never regarded them leaders in the light of Jakande. Imagine if we had told us apart, you can imagine where we would have been now.
And I want to quickly add, do you think Buhari is making amends now by focusing on the rail project that he's doing all around the country? Because, it's more of like he's in government now and he's not saying that, look, the foresight was just there, thinking of this rail program, because it would have helped to ease a lot of, transportation crisis.
Maybe philosophically, we can just say that better late than never, but we are nearly 40 years late. And we know where we would have been if we had gotten it right 40 years ago, when some of these visionary leaders were active. If you permit me, I remember as a growing up journalist, I interviewed Jakande in that is a Lukweju home. He lived in that house before he got to power, lived in that house while he was in power, and remained there even after, until he died. What does that tell me? It tells me that there's a difference between the person and the institution. It could be the official institution or the party institution. Jakande was an exemplar in terms of his ability to use his own personality, his own character, letting it rub on his party and the institution, and which is the value that my colleague was talking about. But we have seen a steady decline in value. not just at the institutional level, but at the level of the political party, and beginning from the level of the individual, which is the problem we are having. And that's why we're saying that we need an integrated, holistic overview, of the structure, not just in physical terms, but also in terms of the soft aspect of it, so that we can make a headway in our quest for development.
Now, okay, let's talk about journalists and politics. I mean, this was one very great journalist who, achieved a lot before he got into politics. Are we seeing that trend still continuing, or when journalists get to power nowadays, they just fall asleep?
Well, journalists are also members of society. They have a special responsibility to speak truth to power, indeed a constitutional responsibility. So we could say that they have an extra burden on their shoulders, Whether that eventually translates to politics and public office when they get there is an issue for debate. I mean, we know that a few of them have been in office, and we know that we may not feel very satisfied with how well they have done, but we know that we have not seen a lot of disgraceful performance, a lot of disagreeable performance.
We have Chief Segun Oshoba who's there, and then Tony Momo, who just passed away one way or the other. Your general assessment, gentlemen, of journalists in government is what I really want to hear.
I would rather want to expand it, by using the journalists as just an epitome of the professional in government. There are some certain attributes that you expect a professional to have, which are principles. You expect them to have fidelity to principles, because what we lack in governance is declining value, no principles, anything goes. We fall for everything. But as a professional journalist or a professional in any discipline for that matter, you're supposed to be aligning to some principles, to some rules and regulations, to some ethics, and to some standards, and to our inability to, little or no interest to compromise. So if you can transport that into governance, of course we'll see improvement. So beyond the journalists, we also need other professionals, to come into government and not leaving it to the average politicians. I will know what we have described the average politician to be, a flip-flopper, somebody who has less regard for ideals, for principles, anything goes. But with more professionals in government, you expect a higher subscription to principles, which will probably exemplify, or we're exemplifying in the character of the journalist.
Okay,
as the case
very quickly, what do you think Lagosians will actually remember the late Jakande for? Just very quickly, each of you.
No, it was an apostle of infrastructural development. He laid the foundation for modern-day Lagos, because all the houses are attributed to him, Banana Island, Lekki, and all of that. So many things. Everywhere you go, you see the imprints of Lateef Jakande. So he's going to live forever.
I think his name is imprinted in the minds of Lagosians, forever, if you ask me, apart from the infrastructure outlay everywhere that you see his name, printed on. I think that the values that he represented,
especially what the Jakande estates,
everywhere, Lagos housing, everywhere, the masses would forever be grateful to him, and then the value, that he espoused while he was in politics and afterward, all the times that he lived, you never find anything, not even a stain,
no invitation by EFCC.
So,
not just negotiators will remember him, Nigerians will remember him as a whole. Do not forget he was a minister, and he developed Lugbe and Gwari Impact to some extent.
So of course, when he was Minister of Works and Housing, but that's the part that he himself and some other awards don't like talking about.
That's an
because they had to come into a military government, and not just a military government, but the military government of the late General Sani Abacha. Well, we'll have to go on a short break right now. When we return, we'll continue with all the stories that we have for you. Do stay with us. Welcome back to This Week. I'm Somna Sambo. It's the 5th day of the impeachment trial of Donald Trump, former president of the United States. U.S. senators are poised to vote later on whether Donald Trump will be held accountable for inciting the January 6th attack at the Capitol after his defense lawyers wrapped up their case. The defense team claimed the ex-president's words were not intended to incite the violence, and the impeachment is nothing more than a politically motivated witch hunt designed to prevent him from serving in office again. House prosecutors urged that Trump's rallying cry to fight like hell, in quotes, for his presidency was part of an orchestrated pattern of violent rhetoric and false claims that unleashed the mob. But an attorney for the former president told senators that Trump was entitled to dispute the 2020 election results and that his doing so did not amount to inciting the violence that followed. Well, I still have with me in the studio Professor Abiodun Adeni, a Rise News analyst, and also by Oke Epia, the publisher of Other Paper Nigeria. Let me start from you, Oke. I mean, this is a novelty that we're seeing that some have said that even African countries need to copy, that you are not just held responsible for whatever happens while you're in power, that even when you step down, whatever you did while in power that disrupted the system, and it's traced to you, you should be liable for it, and consequences should actually follow. Do you think former President Donald Trump could actually earn a ban for life, from participating in U.S. politics again?
Well, I think the more instructive or more important conclusion I would like to draw from this, even though it's unfolding, is that the institutions are able to redeem themselves from, what you may consider very atrocious intrusions, to weaken them. We saw how it took the institution to shake off, the massive attempt to pull it down and get the bull out of the china shop, literally speaking. So, I mean, the institution with such staying power is also able to look back at the recent past and say, look, how did we manage to get that close, to atrophy? How do we ensure that this does not happen again? And that's what's playing out. It's not necessarily about getting Donald Trump, in my opinion, banned for the rest of his life. I mean, he's been president, that's the height of it, so what else does he want in the American system? But it's to set out a precedent out there. Number one, there's already a precedent about he's been out of office as president and is still able to be tried. So the argument that you cannot impeach a president who is out of office because he's no longer in office appears to have been settled. The other point being that, look, let us go the whole hog and set another precedent that anyone in future does not have to try this again when you see the consequences that would befall, Mr. Donald Trump, after all of this trial. For me, that's what is more enduring. And I think that we should be looking out for, and for systems like us, our polity, these are the kind of lessons that we should be looking out to draw. The kind of comparisons that government officials are making out of it, I think they are rather misplaced at this point in time. What lessons are we able to draw as a country, going forward, to strengthen our institutions and to make sure that we get it right going forward?
Now, some revelations coming out from the hearings have shown that Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader in the House of Representatives, had a phone conversation with former President Donald Trump, and where he was almost like glorifying, the insurrection by those people who went to the Capitol and all of that. And a lot of people are surprised. Now, the senators, about 5 senators are actually calling for witnesses and all of that. What does this say about the man Donald Trump himself? Why would you want to disrupt a system that actually put you in place?
Well, first, I think it's just to observe that America, for me, is a bastion of democracy, an epitome of civilization because of their commitment to the ideas of freedom, liberty, and prosperity. Happiness is also integral to it. And we have seen this playing out with this impeachment experience. And I said it at the time that I see an American system, showing that they have shocks, they have the capacity to prevent, a character, with every due respect, like Donald Trump, emerging in the future. It just tells you that no system is perfect. Perfection is only of God. And in circumstances, there can be outlier. Donald Trump, to me, was an outlier, but what is more important is for the American system, or for any system for that matter, to have mechanisms, to push out or prevent outliers from disrupting, you know, the flow, negative disruption anyway, from disrupting the flow of systems. Because
but what we want to
they
wonder,
can be very destructive.
very
if not for the strength
in,
of the American institution, Donald Trump will have wrought more damage than we saw.
Yeah, and that's where I'm going to actually. What gave Donald Trump the confidence that he could be calling officials to actually tamper with the system or calling some people to do an insurrection? Remember, he called the Georgia Secretary of State demanding for certain things to be done, and here would actually call the rigging and all of that, you know, for the votes to be increased and all of that. Here he is being accused again of, you know, calling, you know.
I think there's no social.
A lawmaker.
It's not necessarily a social. Donald Trump didn't do what he did because he was socially constructed to do that. I would rather say it was a biological construction that was unique to him. There was not in the American system from the beginning to the end is one that privileges freedom, you know, and the expression of same. You know, everything around them is about freedom, is about order, it's about organization. But irrespective of that, we have somebody, you know, who went against the norm of social construction and did what he did. So it wasn't a matter of social construction. It was rather a biological construction. That was his person. And that's why we kept talking about alternative reality. You know, he kept seeing things differently from how everyone else was seeing it. So that was the problem. You cannot take this out. And that's why people have also said that beyond going through mechanisms set out by political parties in the emergence of leaders, there should also be some kind of other kinds of checks, maybe medical or somewhat.
Psychological checks.
Or psychological, just to ascertain that people are fit and proper. Look, when certificates are given in schools, we give them in character and in learning. You know, if your character is somewhat, if there are questions around your character, you're not giving those certificates. So it should also be brought into the political space as we go forward.
Okay, okay. Let's talk about what a lot of people from Africa, for example, are already saying that look, left to them, it looks like you know, Donald Trump is just facing double jeopardy because, I mean, for now, having conceded power eventually, although forcefully, though he didn't say it out, but at least he had to leave the White House, that it looks like that was enough concession because he could have as well disrupted the whole systems and all of that. So he should be forgiven. If it were to happen here, you would have seen a lot of supporters canvassing for forgiveness, for Trump is now a changed man and all of that. The impeachment trial after he has left power should be disabled and all of that. What would you say?
I mean, you won't be surprised if some would come out to say he's a man of peace and he should be nominated for a Nobel Prize, you know.
And some people will also sponsor protesters.
People are also saying that now.
You see, but for me, the more fundamental thing is that Trump became a movement, right?
Called Trumpism.
Exactly. And in all of this, you cannot completely wave away or wave aside the fact that he secured over 70 or so million votes. So there are pockets of Trumps all over America. The ones who went to Capitol Hill on January 6th, they are just a different strain. Perhaps I would agree with Prof on the biological construct on those kind of, you know, Trump, you know, supporters. But there are other Trump supporters who are less violent, who are less, you know, who are out there all over America. And I think that is why the Senate, right, needs to do and conclude what it is doing. That is why the institutions must be able to set a precedence. It's out of office. We could very well let it rest and let's move on. Yeah. I perceive that in the president himself. President Biden seems to be more interested
because
on how to deal with his challenges.
He's more interested in solving the current challenges.
But you see, they need to do this and set it on record that just in case, nobody comes tomorrow, just in case you become another Trump in another light, and then you want to try this, and you think, so you not even think about it. They want to place that on record and ensure that the American system that has been built for centuries continues to remain unshaken, continues to remain very strong and able to deal with its weaknesses.
Thank you so much. Okay, APR publisher of Other Paper and Professor Abiodun Adeni, Arise News analyst here. It's been nice discussing these issues with you gentlemen, and that's how it's been for this edition of This Week. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, London and Washington, goodbye and thank you for watching.